Today I had the great fortune to be talking to Deborah Spitalnik, who is the director of the Boggs Center, which is our New Jersey unit, and the left.
Yeah.
Why should we learn about disability history?
Well, I think it's a great question. Why I think that's important is that if we want to continue to promote disability rights and we want to preserve the rights and policy that we have, I think it's really important to understand where that came from, because it wasn't automatic. The policies and the supports we have been hard fought. And if we understand more how we got to where we are, then we can avoid past mistakes, but also build on past strategies. So I think it's important to know our history. It's important to know what people who came before us went through, did for all of us. And I think it's kind of helps us avoid pitfalls and also not take our rights and supports for granted. And we have a very tragic history in our that affects the people we care about, of institutionalization, of lack of help for families. And so we want to make sure that the clock doesn't get turned back to those days, and that people can continue to have lives that they want in the community, and that we can all belong together.
I have heard a lot about Gunnar, Deborah, and Elizabeth Boggs, and I have looked up to them for years. Can you tell me a little bit about why they're so important to the movement?
They both really helped create the field of advocacy in disability rights. Elizabeth Boggs was a scientist who had a baby right after World War II with severe disabilities, and there were no supports available, and she began to advocate and connect to scientists and urge government. And she and her husband were two of the founders of what is now the ARC, and she was on the President Kennedy's panel that went around the world to find out what other countries were doing that became the basis for all our law. And Gunnar was the director of what was then NARC, a great advocate. His wife, Rosemary Dubois, promoted normalization. And Gunnar really guided the ARC in Pennsylvania to bring suit about the right to education that became the Park case, that became our first federal education law. And then he was a witness, an expert witness in cases where people were so concerned about institutions, and helped really shed light on why people needed to live in the community. Elizabeth was a family member. Gunnar and Rosemary Dubois were supporters of families, and Gunnar was one of the best promoters of self-advocacy, starting in the early 1980s, and respecting the voices and encouraging the voices of people with disabilities.
I remember meeting Gunnar, and we became friends right away, and to this day I still have a soft spot in my heart for Gunnar.
Me too. I also feel really blessed that I had the privilege of knowing Elizabeth, knowing Gunnar and Rosemary, knowing you, and really getting to be, in some small way, part of the disability rights movement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that we have talked about history, if you had the crystal ball, what would you see the next 50 years 20 years, 50 years would be like?
I think I have great hopes that as we find more ways to support the voices of people with disabilities, we will really learn what makes a difference in people's lives. I also have a lot of fear that the way the tax cuts were put in place, that the federal deficit is growing, and I worry a lot that a lot of the good supports and services like SSI, like the home and community-based services waivers, that those will be threatened because of the budget. And so advocacy is going to be really important, even more than ever, to make it clear that we can't make people with disabilities pay for those tax cuts, and that we have to make sure that as a disability rights movement, we join hands with other people who are advocating for their rights, and together we'll all have louder voices.
Thank you.